Uh, when did you come to Shreveport, and what brought you here?
I came to Shreveport in 1948. The rector at St. Mark's called me after I had graduated from the Curtis Institute and said he wanted me to come down and look at the job at St. Mark's. And I was, at that time, in New York. Had just had an audition to go to the Union Theological Seminary School of Sacred Music. And so I said, well, and I had just been offered a job on the faculty. And so I said, well, I'll have to go back to Philadelphia and see what Dr. McCurdy wants. And so when I got back to Philadelphia, he said, you have this offer to come down to Shreveport to see the church in Shreveport at St. Mark's. And I said, well, why on earth would I want to go to Shreveport? That's in Louisiana. And he said, well, you know, you really are a snob. And I said, well, I guess I am. But he said, you never say no until you look at the job. And he said, this sounds like it's just made for you. And he said, in the second place, Lucille, my wife, is really a Southern lady, and she's never going to be happy up in the East. And said, you can go to a place like St. Mark's and bring a whole new dimension to the music down there that they don't have now. Said, you can stay in New York and have a fine career, but you can have a much more wonderful career in a place like St. Mark's. And said, anyway, they will pay your expenses to go down and look, and you should never say no until you at least look. So I flew down to Shreveport, and we went to the old St. Mark's. That's before they built this beautiful building. And I was pretty appalled at what I saw. The old choir house, you could look through the floor and see the ground. And the parish hall was pretty awful. It was pretty bad too. The church itself was quite charming. It's like an English village church. And the organ is an Aeolian-Skinner organ, 3 manuals, but it had no general pistons at all. And I thought, oh my goodness, I have made a terrible mistake. This is not going to work at all. So anyway, I had an audition with the music committee, and we had a visit with them afterwards, and they offered me the job, and I said no. I would not take the job. Then they asked me if I would tell them why. And I said, well, shall I be truthful or tactful? I didn't know who these people were. And so they said, oh, be truthful. And I said, well, look at this building we were in. It was the parish hall. And I said, it should be condemned. It's just it's a fire trap. And they said, well, as a matter of fact, it has been condemned. And I said, oh. And then they said, the choir building, the choir school over there, choir house, is so bad I can look through the holes in the floor and see the ground underneath. And I said, that should be condemned also. And they said, well, it has been. And I said, well, why would I want to come down and get into a place like this? And they just waited. And I said, now the organ is a fine example of an Aeolian-Skinner organ, but it has no general pistons or none of the things that we use to play today. And so they said, well, we're awfully sorry you turned us down. And at that point, the rector unrolled a series of blueprints on his desk. And he said, would you like to look at what we were planning in the future? And I didn't know very much about reading a blueprint, but I could see right off the bat that if they were planning anything of the scale that was apparent in these blueprints, that it was a major building project. And so I looked at them and I said, well, since we're being very frank about this, is this a daydream or is this going to be in the reasonable near future? And they said, oh no, this is coming up very soon. and we wanted you to come down now to help us design the buildings, and especially all of the music department. And I said, well, perhaps we better run this through again. And the upshot of that was that I took the job and have been here ever since. And that was in 1948. And have had an absolutely marvelous time. I was here for 39 years as the organist and choirmaster, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
How long were you in the old church before moving to this one?
Not very long. We came here in 1948, and we moved out here maybe 5 years later. We weren't in the building. In this church, we were in the parish hall first. And this was built in sections, or they called it phases. They built the parish hall as the first phase, and with the office buildings. And I played a big baldwin, which was just awful, and had to have services in a totally dead parish hall. And then the church was the second section, second phase, and then the school was phase 3. So maybe 5 years, and then another. Well, we dedicated the church in 1959, and so it was 11 years from the time I came here until we got into the main church.
Now, when you got to the church downtown, was the Williams family taking care of that organ?
Yes. Jack Williams and Sally were taking care of the organ, and they had been taking care of the organ for a long time. And the plan, after we got into it, was to take that organ and make it the gallery organ here. And so little by little, I had taken out several ranks of the organ downtown with the idea that we were going to bring that organ out here. And I had replaced some of the swell reeds with new Aeolian-Skinner trumpet harmonic and a 4-foot Cathedral. And I had replaced the 16-foot trombone with a bombard, and just one or two things like that we were doing, trying to get the organ there ready to go into the gallery here. But the Williamses, Jack and Sally Williams, and Jim and Nora, his son and his wife, had been taking care of the organ for many years.
Was Roy Perry involved with them at that point?
Yes.
Were they friends already?
Yes. Roy, they had, Jack and Sally Williams had been taking care of Roy Perry's organ in Kilgore for many years. I don't know how long when they started their association with him, but they were over there with him before that.
Do you remember the first time you met him?
Roy? Yes. I played a recital, my debut recital, as it were, in October here down at the old church in 1948. And Roy came backstage, not backstage, but came back to meet me in the sacristy after the recital. And I remember, this is a terrible thing to say, I guess, but when I met him, I thought, oh, I wonder if there are two Roy Perrys, because it was sort of a surprise to meet him. Those of you who knew him, he had a bald head and one eye was not quite right, and he had a little pot belly, and his hands shook a great deal, and I thought, oh my goodness. But within a minute, he had totally won me over as a great friend, and you weren't aware of those little physical problems at all. He was completely charming. And that was in October, the first part of October in 1948. And we became fast friends almost immediately, and up until the time of his death.
That would be about the time that I guess they were designing the rebuild in Kilgore, because that was 1949. So
Yes.
it must have been right in the middle of that.
Right in the middle of that, yes.
Do you happen to know who thought of the trumpet enchantment? Was it him or Mr. Harrison?
I don't know that. No, I don't know.
So someone asked me that recently. I have no idea. Do you know it's the first one in the United States?
Yes, I do know that. And the first time I heard it, I jumped up in the air.
Really?
I hadn't heard anything like that either. And it's right in front of the organ, as you well know. And didn't know what to expect. And Roy had me come over to listen to it, and didn't know what to expect. And it's startling if you've never heard anything like that before. And I thought it was absolutely marvelous.
Could we make a statement about that so that we kind of know what it is? What did you call it?
Trumpet on Shemaiah.
Could you say the trumpet? I don't know if I can say the word out there. Can you say a statement like the trumpet in the Kilgore Opus 1173 is very unique versus the United States? Maybe just a couple of comments about that.
Yes, we were talking about the trumpet on Shemad, and in the First Presbyterian Church in Kilgore. And this was the first stop of this kind in America. And when you say on Shemad, that means that the pipes are lying down flat rather than standing up straight. And it's a very brilliant trumpet on high pressure. And it's a fanfare trumpet. It's not an ensemble trumpet at all. It's a very loud trumpet used for fanfare, and it is played against the organ rather than with it as a general rule.
Fantastic. Do you know much about his early life, Roy Perry's?
No, not really. I know he was born in Lake Charles, and he went to Kilgore, I think, during the big oil rush there, and I think that was in the 1920s or 30s. I've forgotten exactly.
I think it's 32.
Okay. And it seems to be like he played in the theater. And I don't know, as a theater organist, and I don't know exactly when he went to the organ at First Presbyterian Church. I do know that he went to school in Denton it used to be called Denton Normal at the University of North Texas. And he used to laugh and say he had gone to school at Denton Normal. And he got his degree there. But I don't know much about his early life other than that.
Do you know when he studied with Hugh McCamus?
No.
'Cause I know
I don't know when that was. I know he did study with Hugh McCamus.
Yeah. I know he listed him as his teacher. I just didn't know.
Yes, I don't know when that was.
Okay. Well, I know the Krim family brought him to Kilgore. Were you ever around them much?
Only at receptions and things like that. I talked to Mr. Krim once or twice, particularly one time when, after Roy had died, they were going to bring another organist was there, and they were about to hire a maintenance man that I thought was very questionable in his ability. And I was playing a concert over there, and I was talking to Mr. Krim afterwards, and I suggested that he might want to look into somebody else to look after the organ, that I didn't think that person was really capable, that was a very unique organ there. And you really had to know what Roy had in mind when he designed the organ there in Kilgore. But it's a very special instrument. And if you knew what he had in mind, that was all right. But if you didn't know what he had in mind, you could really mess it up. And it's a very special instrument. And fortunately, Mr. Krim asked me to be a little bit more specific, and I was. And he did make a different choice and saw that the organ was preserved and it was not messed up. It has not been messed up at all. But I've had very little contact with the Grims. I knew who they were, and we were just together socially once or twice.
Now, there's some other innovations in that organ too, like that harmonic Spitz flute Celeste and the carillon mixture up on the swell. You know, I think he invented those, didn't he?
Yes, they were kind of unique. The little carillon, he wanted to sound like it was shattering glass. That's the term he used for me. And he did that also in this organ to a different extent. As he was finishing this organ has 21 ranks of mixtures in the great organ, just in the great. And after he had voiced the big plein jeu, which had 6 ranks in it, he decided that that wasn't enough. And he wanted it to be much more exciting. And so he said, I'm going to order 4 more ranks for that mixture, but they were just repeating ranks. It was just a repeating mixture. You have to be very careful in using that because if you're playing a Bach fugue, you haven't a clue where the melody is because you can't tell which octave the thing is in because the thing repeats itself. And so it's wonderful if you're playing big, massive chords and that sort of thing. It adds a wonderful amount of brilliance. It's awful to try to play polyphony or anything like that, any kind of counterpoint. We just never did that because the first time I tried to play a fugue, I thought I was losing my mind. I couldn't tell what octave I was playing in. And so little things like that Roy did, you'd have to know what was going on or you listen very carefully. But the plein jeu, the top 4 ranks on the plein jeu was very much like what he had done on the organ in Kilgore. And it adds a brilliance, and it's like shattering glass, and it really is. It's so high, and it's very brilliant.
What an ear he must have had to.
Oh, amazing! Yes, his sense of color was absolutely spectacular, and he would take any amount of time that was necessary to get it exactly the way he heard it and to get it right.
Amazing. Now, you said that you used to play your recitals for him before you took him on tour, didn't you?
Yes. Before I would go off on tour, Roy would invite me to come over, and I would spend a couple of days practicing in a place like St. Mark's, which is so busy, it's such a busy church, and with the day school and everything, it was almost impossible to get uninterrupted practice. And Roy was very much aware of that. And so before I would leave on a tour, I would go to Kilgore and Roy would lock me in the building. And I would practice uninterrupted all morning, and then he would take me out and give me a hamburger for lunch, and then bring me back after lunch and lock me in the building again. And then he would come in about 5 in the afternoon and listen to the program and critique it. And it was marvelous. He has such an accurate ear. At that time, he had some problems with some of the hearing later on, but at that time, his hearing was just wonderful. He never said, no, you must do it this way. He would always say, I wonder what would happen if you tried this, or try this, or have you thought about this stop at this point, or what would happen if you do it this way? So then the next day, I would try to incorporate the various suggestions that he made. It was amazing how many times I adopted his suggestions, because they were always musical, and they always fitted the music. But I would go there and practice for 2 or 3 days, uninterrupted. Nobody bothered me at all in the church, and it was so valuable. And each day he would critique what I had done during the day. And so by the time after I've had a couple of days there, then I felt like I was more prepared to go on tour than I could ever have gotten ready here. And I was so grateful for that help and for his suggestions.
I was listening to that volume 10, the music of the church that has I Was Glad on it. And
Yes.
And his performance of the Bruce Simons is miraculous. He just goes to such pains to get just one color for one chord.
Yes. Well, his ear, he could just figure out what to do. And sometimes, if you ever watched him play, his hands shook so much from a problem that he had during the Second World War. And sometimes I marveled at how he could maneuver the organ and the stops to get exactly the sound he wanted. And he would take infinite time to figure out how to get the sound that he wanted. But he could always figure out some way to do it. And it was remarkable. I have 1 or 2 of his scores that he gave me. And to look at his markings on the scores It's quite revealing to see that how far in advance he was getting the things ready to be done at another place, because he couldn't wait until he got to that particular place in the music, because his hands shook so badly that he had to start getting things ready several measures in advance. And it's really quite remarkable. But when he got to that particular place, everything was ready to be done, and it always came off. And it was remarkable how he could control the organ, and it was so musical, and it always was just so smooth and made such good sense musically.
How would you describe his personality? Was he moody? Was he always jocular? 'Cause I've heard so many funny stories about him, but he must have had a lot of depth too.
He was a very complex man. He was one of the funniest people I have ever known. You never knew what he was going to say, and it was nearly always funny. But in addition to that, there was a very, very serious side, just from the fact that he would take such infinite pains to get just exactly the sound that he wanted. Or he was a very sensitive musician. He would take a lot of times trying to figure out what the music was trying to say and how he could make it say what it wanted to say. He was well read, not just musical things, but he read a lot of philosophy. He read a lot of history. He always had a book by his table where he read a lot. He was, as I say, he was a very complex person. He pulled himself up by his own bootstraps to where he was highly intelligent. He was very sensitive, and I think sometimes his sense of humor and all these funny little remarks covered up a lot of his sensitivity. I guess that pretty well rounds it up. I don't know what else to say about him.
He had a hard upbringing. I think he was raised by a stepfather, maybe.
Yes.
It was cruel to him, I believe.
Yes, I'm sure it was very difficult for him. And I don't know how much encouragement he had. I think he pretty well was self-made and taught himself pretty much to play the organ for the most part. And I don't know how he learned to do all this marvelous voicing of the organ. I just don't know where that came from. On an organ like this is a big organ, and he took such infinite pains on the voicing of it. Invariably, when all of these visiting organists have come here and played, and we love to share the organ with everybody, they have all commented on the exquisite voicing of the organ. And it was wonderful to me to watch him and listen to him work so hard on just individual pipes, just to get them to speak exactly the speech to be, and with the color that he wanted, and make it all blend. A couple of little stories. One of those times when I was practicing over there, I noticed there was a Dead Sea on one of the things, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I don't usually find anything wrong over in Kilgore. And then later on, I found another Dead Sea. And to make a long story short, I mentioned to him when he came in, I said, are you aware that you have some Dead Seas on the organ? And he sort of laughed. He said, well, yes. And he said, you're smart enough to figure it out, so I might as well tell you what I've done. He said, you have coveted my strings on the organ here, the sound of the strings on the organ here. And so what I did was take the C's out of the organ in Kilgore and send them to the factory so that they can duplicate the strings on the Kilgore organ on your organ in Shreveport, which I can't imagine him doing for many people, to be able to let me have the beautiful string sounds that he has on his organ on the organ here. And he told me one time, he said, I kind of outdid myself because your strings are more beautiful than mine. And he said, I could have messed those up had I wanted to, but I really couldn't bring myself to do it. Another time, he happened to go back to Kilgore for his Sunday services. And I came in one Monday morning, and he was sitting here pondering, and I said, you look like you've lost your best friend. And he said, well, I'm trying to decide if I'm going to lose my best friend or not. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, I've always loved my harmonic flute. And I'm to the point now where I have to do your harmonic flute today. I can either make it more beautiful than mine or I can mess it up. And he said, I haven't decided which way I'm going to go. And he said, I'll probably give in and make yours more beautiful than mine. And he said, but I haven't decided whether I'm going to do that yet or not. So finally he said, I came back later on in the day and I said, which way did you decide to go? He said, you won out. So that's the way he would do. He was a really remarkable man and a remarkable friend.
Was he in on the initial designs for the organ too?
Beg pardon?
When you started the designs for this organ, was he in on the initial?
Oh, yes. Yes, that was kind of interesting. Roy, I did a design, a sketch, a stop list. Roy did a stop list, and G. Donald Harrison did a stop list. And then we got together and compared them. I had quite a battle with Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison wanted a 5-manual console, and he did not want a solo, and he did not want a big choir. And I had to remind Mr. Harrison that one of the charges that they gave me when I came here from the rector was that he wanted me to establish an oratorio season. Back in the 1950s, all the big churches in the East had regular oratorio seasons. The church where I was with Dr. McCurdy in Philadelphia did an oratorio every Sunday afternoon from October through April. And I was accustomed to that. And I said, Mr. Harrison, when it comes to push to shove, it's going to have to go my way. And I said, I have been charged to do an organ that will play the oratorio repertoire, not only the literature of the church and the literature of the organ, but I have to be able to accompany the oratorio repertoire. Now, I have to have those orchestral voices. That's item number one. Item number two, I want a big English choir because the organ basically and primarily is to accompany the services of the Anglican Church. And I need that big choir to accompany with. I don't want a 5-manual console. I don't know anything in my repertoire that I have to have 5 keyboards to play. They look very elegant and they're fine, but on the 5th keyboard, the only thing you have is a 5-voice cornet and a big battery of reeds. We've got a battery of reeds all over the organ as it is now. I don't need that. Now, we're going to have to reduce the size of the organ. I think your design of the organ is too much for the size of the room. He looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, is it a matter of the cost? And I said, no, I have not been given a figure.
Is this up in Boston that you were meeting?
No, we were in Kilgore. And I said, no, it was not a matter of the cost. I have not been given a figure. But I said, the organ is too big. I don't need that big an organ. Well, I could have slit my throat since then. because he had 4 32s in the pedal. And I said, no, I don't need 4 32s. So I cut out 2 of them. I wish I'd kept at least 1 more of them. He had a positive division and a small choir. I took out the positive section and made a big choir. I wish I had kept the big choir and just kept the positive too. That would have been much better. One of the things that Mr. Harrison was doing at that time was not putting any reeds on the grate. And the way Roy got around that on this organ was by putting 2 reed choruses on the swell. He has an English reed chorus on an English set and a French set. So in building up the organ, we would use the English set in building up through the swell. And then we'd use the French set to top the grate and to act as grate reeds. So that worked very, very well. And also to have both sets of reeds on the swell and with one 16-foot underneath it, to have the swell box closed, then gradually open that up, it is absolutely hair-raising. It's marvelous. Well, Mr. Harrison finally agreed to that. He didn't want to have 2 sets of reeds on the swell, but Roy talked him into that. I talked him in. I almost had to threaten to go and have Moeller build the organ because he was dead set against the solo. And I said, well, I'm going to have it one way or the other. You can build it, or they'll build it in Hagerstown. Well, of course, that was like throwing up a red flag. So he finally agreed that he would build the organ with the solo, with all those beautiful orchestral stops on the organ. When it came time to move out here, a group of the people in the old St. Mark's decided they wanted to keep the church downtown and form another congregation. And that was done with the bishop's blessing and with the blessing of the parish. And they said, well, now what are we going to do about the organ? Because you were going to take that and put it in the gallery. And I said, well, I think it would be a disaster to leave the people without an organ downtown. So we left the organ downtown. I said, however, I want to have something from the organ downtown to go with the organ out here. So I had already taken the Vox Humana out of the old organ and put a clarion in, getting it ready to go out here. So I brought the Vox Humana from out here, and I wanted to bring the French horn, which was the Aeolian-Skinner French horn, and so I brought those. And Roy insisted that we bring the harp and the celesta. I have no earthly idea why, but so we have those from the old organ, the Aeolian-Skinner, the beautiful Vox Humana, the French horn, and the harp and the celesta. Otherwise, we left the Aeolian-Skinner downtown, but with all those lovely things I had bought and put into the organ, thinking it was going to be in the gallery. So, but this turned out to be mostly me, but a lot of Roy and some of Mr. Harrison. But it finally turned out to be what I wanted because I had the purse. And but it really was a combination of all 3 of us working together. And interestingly enough, this is opus number 1308. And the organ that they built for the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Independence, Missouri, is 1309. They were both in the factory at the same time. And they're about the same size. The one in Missouri is just a little bit bigger than this. It's interesting to see the total difference in the 2 organs. This is designed for a big Gothic liturgical church. The one in Missouri is designed for a vast auditorium that has a totally different concept for it. And I had the great pleasure of playing one of the opening recitals on the organ up there. And it was interesting to be there and play this one and play that one too. They're so much alike, and yet they're so totally different. So does that answer that, or have I gone on too long on that?
By the time this was built, Mr. Harrison had died, though. Did Joseph Whiteford try to make any changes in it?
Yes, Mr. Harrison tried to make some changes, and the one main thing that he changed that was unsuccessful, I had specified a full-length 32-foot reed in the pedal called a contra-ophiclide, and that was based on the reed in the First Baptist Church at Longview, which was an absolutely marvelous reed. For some reason or other, Mr. Whiteford decided he was going to put in a 3/4 length reed. Well, that just does not work. And the first time I heard this one, I thought it was just simply awful. And I said, it sounds like there's somebody out there with a hammer tearing out the street. And they thought that was terrible. And I just hated the thing. It was way too loud. It didn't go with the rest of the organ at all. I could only use it as the postlude on Easter Sunday. It was just awful. And I kept saying, take it back and do it again. And they would not do it. And I said, well, then cut it off and make it a half-length reed. They wouldn't do that either. So we just didn't use it. We just couldn't use the 32-foot reed. I just didn't play it. Finally, after 13 years, they took it off and sent it someplace else. I won't say where they sent it. And the people who took it threw up their hands in horror and sent it back to the factory. And they brought me what I sounded like a bunch of stovepipes. I heard one pipe and said, stop. It says, take it out. I won't have it in the building. And so we didn't have it anyway. So after all that time, they finally decided they would cut it off and make it a half-length reed. So it's now a half-length reed. It's still way too loud, does not fit the organ, and I've been unhappy with it from day one. And I'll be unhappy with it till I die. So it's there, and I can't do a thing about it. So Joe never liked the organ because Roy completely revoiced it. And that is the reason it was never recorded on the King Instrument series. He figured it was not his organ, it was Roy Perry's organ. And he never would let it be recorded, which I thought was very interesting.
I wonder why, it's a wonder that he kept him as a representative for the company.
Well, he was selling too many organs. He was making money for the company. But he felt like this was not his work because Roy absolutely revoiced the entire organ. But if you had heard it before Roy got a hold of it, and then heard it when Roy got through with it, it's a totally different organ. Totally different organ.
Nora told me that she had to cut up every mixture pipe in the organ. Nora Williams told me she had to cut up every pipe in the organ.
Oh yeah, they spent months. They spent, I think, 9 months finishing the organ. They did an enormous amount of work, just an enormous amount of work.
Do you know if they had to do it on all the instruments they installed?
I don't know. I don't know what they did, but I know that I heard Roy say, after he sat down to this, he said, well, we'll have to just start from scratch and redo the whole organ. So I don't know about the other organs. I can't say for that. I know it just took them forever to get it in. I remember one time I thought they were not working nearly fast enough, and I got on Jimmy Williams's back, see if they could work a little faster. So he just didn't come to work at all the next day. And so I said, when he did come to work, I said, are you trying to tell me something? And he said, yes. And he said, get the lessons, get the message. He said, this organ is big. And he said, it's a very complex organ because you have to wire both these organs together, the one in the little ruther. And he said, I will get it in, and it'll be right when I get it in, but I'm not going to have you on my back. Now, it's going to be here for a long time when we get it in, but if you get on my back again, I'll just go fishing again. But if you leave me alone, I'll do it, and I'll do it right. And I never said another word to him. And it's been absolutely marvelous all these years, you see. And he was true. And I remember one time when they were doing the working with Roy in here, one of the ladies of the altar guild came in and she said, "Oh, don't stop. You're not bothering me." And he looked at her and says, "But madam, you're certainly bothering me." So he had several pithy remarks to some of the ladies of the church, but I won't go into that.
They were all good cooks too, weren't they?
The what?
The Williams and Roy Perry were all good cooks too, weren't they?
They were. I don't get that.
The Williams family and Roy Perry were all good cooks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, they were marvelous cooks. Yes. I don't. They would almost see who could outdo the other one. Yeah. And of course, Jimmy and Nora were from New Orleans, and they did that wonderful Creole cooking. And Roy was a gourmet cook also. And it was just wonderful. The food was terrific. And they come up with all sorts of dishes. And Jimmy and Nora would come up from New Orleans with a whole tow sack full of oysters or shrimp or whatever, and we'd have great food for a while.
Did they have an apartment over here when they were installing the organ? Or?
Yes, and I don't remember where it was, but they would always take an apartment no, I think they stayed at a motel. They stayed at a motel when they were here.
I was telling Lucas on the way over here how Mr. Harrison's designs were revolutionary, that an American classic organ that you could play Baroque music, French music, American romantic music with equal success.
Yes.
And you could also do that with this organ, of course.
Well, I think it's very interesting on this organ. You could play anything on it, really. For instance, in the pedal, there's an unenclosed principal chorus. You have an unenclosed flute chorus, and you have an enclosed flute chorus. You have an unenclosed string. You have an enclosed string. You have an unenclosed reed chorus. You have an enclosed reed chorus. So you can be totally Baroque if you want to play everything unenclosed, or you can have everything enclosed. You can go almost any way you want to. There are two different cornets. You have a flute cornet, and you have a principal cornet on the great, flute cornet on the swell. So you could go most of the way you want to go, anything you want to do. And of course, you have all these marvelous, you have a crumhorn or you have a clarinet. You can do both. You have both on this organ. Fortunately, the budget was big enough that you were able to do lots of things that sometimes you're not able to do.
And you played the dedication of this organ, didn't you?
Yes.
And I think you played a little bit of everything on that.
Well, I tried to do a lot of different types of things. Was that what you were going to say?
Yes.
Yeah. It was trying to be just a very eclectic program to show what it could be. Do some Bach and some Mendelssohn or whatever. I forgot what was all over the program now. But you could play. I haven't found anything I really couldn't play on it. The grate, of course, is totally unenclosed, and you have unenclosed flutes on the grate. So I don't know. You just do anything you want to. You have all the little closed flutes on the. Well, I guess it's not an unenclosed flute. It's just unenclosed flute and an unenclosed principal on the little organ here in the back. And then you've got the little gallery organ in the back. That's like a divided swell, really. It's just like a swell division. But Roy designed that one. I didn't have anything to do with that. He worked out the swell, the gallery organ himself. And it's been highly successful. I just took his word for that one.
Your signature piece, I guess, has become the Willen, hasn't it?
Well, I did it an awful lot, and I did the Roybke almost as much, the Roybke Sonata and the Willen. And of course, with all the color they have on this organ, it was both of those were highly successful, and particularly the Wiesemann. But I enjoyed it playing because it comes off so well on this organ. But it's a lot of fun. Roy had me learn the Malingro, the symphony, the symphony to the Mystic Lamb, because that takes a great deal of color on it too. And I played that for a great deal. And I thought it'd be kind of fun to play it in Europe. And they didn't know who Malingro was. That backfired completely. He was a Belgian, of course. And it was based on the paintings of the triptych over the high altar of the Cathedral in Bruges. And I thought they'd enjoy that. They didn't know who he was. So that failed completely. But that's a big piece. Fred Swan plays that a great deal.
That first movement.
Yeah. It's hard. The second movement is just awful. I was going to put it on the recording. And then I realized that when I played it down at the National Cathedral, National AGO Convention in Houston, at the cathedral down there. And when I got to listening to it to see if it was all right to put on a tape, I realized that one place I got so busy with my hands, I forgot to bring the pedal in. So we couldn't do it. And there was no way to dub the first entrance in, so I didn't get to do it. So I was just so busy, I literally forgot to bring the pedal in. But it's a wicked piece. It's a wonderful piece, but it's wicked to play. But anyway, it's very colorful. And Roy was the one that had me play that. And I think actually John Houston, who used to be the organist at Highland Park Methodist Church in Dallas, was the one who brought it to Roy's attention. And he said, he just said, I ought to do it. So, and I learned it was an awful thing to learn. Constantly changing meters. It was, and particularly the scherzo was a nightmare to play. But it was fun to do. I always loved a challenge and always liked to do new pieces. And I played in the cathedral at Bruges, and so I saw the triptych, the great painting there, of the mystic thing there. And it had more special meaning for me to have having seen the triptych there. So.
Would you talk about the recital that William Watkins gave over in Kilgore in 1950?
Well, it was just spectacular. That was the first time I heard Bill play, and we all sat there just mesmerized. And he played the Wiesemann, I think, on that recital. And I remember he played the E major chorale of Franck, and I don't remember what else. But I just sat there just entranced. And in fact, I went right up to him after the concert and said, will you play next season at St. Mark's? And he did, and I said, will you play the same program? I didn't tell him we didn't have any general pistons down at the old St. Mark's. And he said, all right. So we booked him right on the spot. And he got over here, didn't have any general pistons. We just had 4 master pistons. And he was kind of horrified. But he pulled it off, and it was absolutely, he was one of the most exciting players and just thrilling to hear him. It was so musical. It's so tragic that he had that terrible wreck, and it just, great loss to the music world. Great loss.
Is there anything that we haven't covered about Roy Perry that you think needs to be talked about?
Well, I don't know. He was such fun. He was a great cook. He was the best finisher that I know of. I can always tell when I sit down to one of his organs that whether he did it or not. Just the way the thing goes together.
Do you think his Aeolian-Skinners are better than most of them, the ones that he finished?
Oh, I think so. The finishing is so subtle, and it's so elegant, and everything goes together. So many of the organs, the finishing will be good. It will be a stop will be beautifully finished, but that doesn't mean it blends with the rest of the thing. There'll be something that sticks out somewhere, or it doesn't do quite what it's supposed to do. By itself, it sounds fine, but it just doesn't really go into the ensemble like it should be. Anything that Roy finished, everything goes together. It's absolutely incredible. And the loudness and softness of the dynamic of the thing always seems to be right. And the color always seems to fit into the ensemble. I haven't found anything yet, and I don't know if I will. The only one that I was unhappy with was at the Washington Cathedral. And that was when he was toward the end of his life, and he was having hearing problems. And you had a lot of the upper work and a lot of the bottom work, and nothing in the middle. And that was because his hearing was going. And I thought that was unfortunate. And I was never real happy with what he did at the cathedral there. Now that may be just my doings, because I don't know. Because my hearing is not what it used to be either. But he was having that terrible malady with the nerve endings, that the ends of his nerves were just so bad. And I know when I was there with him and we were listening to the organ, he was leaning over on me. He could hardly stand up, or couldn't sit down, or he was in such terrible, terrible pain. So I don't know how he did it as well as he did. But he had lost some of the top of the pitches, the high pitches and some of the low pitches. And the middle things were beautiful, but compared to the uppers and the lowers, you didn't feel like there was anything in the middle. It didn't balance. And I was always so disappointed in that. And Paul, I don't remember, was Paul Calloway still alive? Paul never did say anything to me about that. And I often wondered what he thought. Or Wayne Dirksen. I'm sure both of them, their hearing was as good as mine, but they didn't say anything. But other people that I have known about did hear that, like I did, that his hearing was not even toward the end there, and that was too bad. But the organ here and in Kilgore and in Longview and those others like that are just beautifully finished. The one at the church in Abilene was so beautiful. You just rarely hear that. You don't hear that much of that anymore. One or two builders do that, but not many. But this is the people who come, especially from Europe. The European organists are just really quite amazed when they hear this. And of course the Americans just crazy about it. They all love the organ, and so it's entirely thanks to Roy.
Charlie Callahan calls it one of the great organs of the world.
Yes. Well, Paul Calloway said the same thing, and people like Marie Claire Alain was just amazed, and even people like Michael Schneider said, "How did you get this here?" And Flor Peters just was amazed when he played here, and Fred Swan was always been amazed with it, and people like David Craighead was one of the ones who opened it, and Catherine Crozier, they've all been here, and without exception. I only had one person who did not like the organ, and that was a little student. I won't say where he was from. I always enjoyed having the students come from those places, and I would show them little idiosyncrasies about the organ and then leave so they could just be free. And I came back in, and this young man was at the organ, and I said, "Oh, how do you like the organ?" And he says, "Oh, I don't like it at all." And I said, "Oh, well, I'm sorry. What do you not like about it?" He said, "I don't like anything about it." And I said, that sort of took me about it, and I said, "Well," he says, "I think it's vulgar." And I said, "Oh, that rather takes my breath away. What kind of organs do you like?" And he said, turned his nose up and says, "Nothing but North German." And I said, "Well, I like those too. Which ones have you played?" And he said, "Well, I haven't played any." And I said, well, I hope you realize you are an utter ass. And I said, I'm so glad I don't have to worry about you getting my job anymore. I can just mark you off the list. Now you just go right back to your teacher and tell him exactly what I said. Such a ridiculous remark. You have nothing on which to base your opinion. You've not been to Germany, you've never played a North German organ, and yet you come over here and knock this organ on the head. Run back to your teacher and tell him I said so. So it was ridiculous. They did do some funny things on this organ that caught me by mistake. Can I go just a little bit more? Somehow or another, we wound up with no oboe on the organ. That just slipped through the cracks. And when I was sitting around playing, and I thought, well, we don't have any oboe. That got by me, it got by Roy, and it got by Mr. Harrison. And I thought, well, how did that happen? And Roy said, well, use your English horn. So I had to do that. So that was the thing. Well, then on the organ over here, there's a contrabass. On the organ at the college, the Aeolian-Skinner Centenary College, the contrabass is the principal. I assumed that was the principal on this organ until I pulled the contrabass. The contrabass on this organ is an open wood. Shocked me to death. So then we had no 16-foot principal because I thought that was the 16-foot principal. And I said, well, where is the 16-foot principal? Well, we didn't have one. And I said, well, what do I do? He said, well, you'll use the violon. It's like a principal anyway, but it's quicker in speech and it's cleaner. And I said, you mean I've got an organ of 105 ranks and no 16-foot principal in the pedal? And he said, well, I guess so. And I said, well, that's unheard of. And no oboe in the swell. How did that happen? Well, those just slipped through the cracks. So even with the best of intentions, some things go astray. Well, Don did get an oboe into the swell eventually, and we did get a 16-foot principal into the pedal. I don't like it. It doesn't begin to be to what we did earlier on. So things go awry even with the best of intentions, so you just never know. But it's still a magnificent organ, and I have never been the least bit tired of it all. And it is so comfortable to play. It is so comfortable. I've played so many organs that the console is never comfortable. I just can't find where the things are. The proportions to the organ and the bench and everything are never just quite right. But this one has always to me been totally comfortable. And everybody else I've talked to said, what did you do? I said, I have no idea. They just built it. But whatever it is, it's right. It is so comfortable to play. So if you have a chance, come to St. Mark's and listen to the organ. And Roy Perry did all the work. Anything else?
It might be good to get some little statements like that last one just to say, come and see these world famous organs or something. Just maybe like some 5-second pieces.
Can you say something about the organs that we're going to visit for this festival? It's the two in Kilgore, First Baptist in Longview, and this one, and just like a closing statement to invite people to the festival.
All right. You're going to hear some more at the festival in November. You'll hear two of the organs in Kilgore. One is at the First Methodist Church, and that's a two-manual. It's one of the largest two-manuals anywhere, I suppose, of that Royce, and it is incredibly versatile. You can just do almost anything with it. It's in a rather dead room, but it comes off remarkably well. And of course, the other one in Kilgore is the marvelous organ at the First Presbyterian Church. Then if are you going to be in Kilgore, in Longview? Well, that was the first of the big Aeolian-Skinners that Roy did. It's in a modern Gothic, I would call it, First Baptist Church, up in the front of the building, absolutely magnificent place. And the first time I heard it, it was just electrifying. And I'd never heard anything like that before, particularly down here. And I remember they brought the organist Gil from Dallas down for a recital one time, and they had me come and play. And I had never heard mixtures like that at that stage of the game. And I closed the recital playing the finale from the Vierne Sixth Symphony, and I got so excited, and I got to playing faster and faster, which you're not supposed to do. And I got to those pedal scales, and I thought, what am I going to do? I thought, just play them. And so I was flying up and down the pedal board, and the people at the Dallas Guild said, how on earth did you play so fast? I said, I haven't a clue. But anyway, it was such an exciting organ, and it was just absolutely marvelous. And so we have those two. They have the two in Kilgore, one in Longview, and you have the organ here, and you're going to have the Skinner down at E.M. Skinner down at the old St. Mark's. Now, I haven't played the one in Nacogdoches. Is it Nacogdoches or Natchitoches?
Nacogdoches.
I have not played that one, so I don't know that.
It's absolutely thrilling.
Good, now I don't know that one. I don't know how I missed that one.
Well, it's kind of off the track.
Yeah.
You have to go out of your way to get there.
I don't know that one, I'm sorry to say. But we're having this festival in November the
14th through the 17th.
14th through the 17th. And for the Roy Perry, they're going to be the organs and they have an evensong here and the choir, and there'll be a roundtable discussion down at Holy Cross with various people. And so lots of things going on to highlight Roy and the organs and his work. Anything else I need to?
No, really appreciate it.
Now, isn't Donnie going to play some for you here?
Yes.
All right, good. Thanks a lot. I enjoyed being with you. Good. All right.